Welcome to the Human Performance Outliers Podcast with your hosts, Dr. Shawn Baker and Zach Bitter. At Human Performance Outliers Podcast, we dive into a wide range of topics revolving around health, nutrition, and physical fitness. If you enjoy the show and wish to support us, please visit patreon.com/HPO podcast. If you do not use Patreon but still wish to support us, please also consider checking out our PayPal page at paypal.me/HPO pod. The link to both of those can also be found in the show notes. Finally, please consider subscribing to us on your favorite podcast listening platform. Now, on to the next topic.
So does he do it? Where are you located?
Shawn is based in Southern California, just outside of LA, and I'm in Phoenix. So
Nice.
we do most of them remotely with Zoom recording, and then every once in a while, Shawn and I will find ourselves in the same location. We'll do a one together. But yeah, mostly remote. It's worked out all right so far.
How did you guys hook up?
I actually met Shawn on Twitter, I guess, technically speaking. And then it was kind of interesting. I'd been thinking about starting a podcast for at least a year, but just wasn't quite sure what kind of angle I wanted to do. And I do like extreme endurance stuff and follow, like a high fat diet more or less. And Shawn is, carnivore. So my thought was with him, like it would be kind of cool because he's kind of the opposite of me in terms of what types of exercises we're doing. He's more like short burst, high intensity, and I'm kind of, run all day sometimes, more aerobic type stuff. So I thought it'd be kind of a cool combo where we have a similar dietary approach, but two very different kind of exercise protocols, more or less, or targets. So I like to think we kind of have a lot of areas covered with that. So
Amazing.
Hey guys, I'm here.
Hey, how's it going?
What's up? Are you all right?
Yeah, no, I'll tell you, it's a tragic story because, we have a little 6-year-old boy and we have a little gal that takes him to school, and she called us and said, I've been in an accident. She got rear-ended on the 405 near, outside of South LA. It's busy traffic. So she was in a carpool lane trying to change lanes. Somebody smashed into her. Nobody was hurt. So we had to go up there and, just kind of check it out, make sure the boy was okay. And,
Jeez.
it's hard, with all the traffic, there's gazillions of traffic. It's impossible to so the cops had to come and shut down the interstate so we could get our cars off the road. And so dealing with that stuff. But the real tragedy of this, fortunately no one was hurt. The car is going to need a little repairs, but the real tragedy is I had 3 steaks cooking.
Oh, God.
I had 3 butcher box. I had 2 ribeyes and a New York strip that I was already in the middle of cooking. So I had to shut it down. So I got a steak that's kind of half cooked, half not cooked.
Gross.
I don't know how it's going to taste at the end, but I'll have to deal with that and eat a little later. So
that's slow and low this time around, I guess.
That's my big tragedy for the day. But anyway,
so that's a good tragedy.
Hey, do you go by, how do you say your last name, by the way? Is it Lyon or Lyon?
It's Lyon.
Lyon. So it's not the French pronunciation, which I would guess. So
let me just ask you, which branch of the military were you in?
I was in the Air Force. I had 2 sort of forays in the Air Force. Back in 1992, when I dropped out of medical school to play rugby, which is kind of a crazy story, but I did that. And then when I came back, I still wanted to play rugby. So at that time, the military was the best place in the United States to play. And so So I went into the Air Force, and I became a nuclear weapons guy. I launched nuclear bombs for my day job, and then I played rugby for them. And then I got tired of getting my head kicked in when I was about 30. So I went back to medical school. The military paid for that, and then I came back in as a military, orthopedic, kind of a trauma surgeon guy, and then I did that for about 5 years. So
got it.
And you're in New York, right? Is that right?
Yeah. My fiance is a Navy SEAL.
Yeah, I saw you post something about that. Cool. Yeah. I knew quite a few Navy SEALs. As athletes, I used to train with a lot of those guys. Good people.
Yeah. He's going to medical school.
Oh, nice.
It's his second career.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it is kind of funny. Yeah, I started, like I said, I went back. I was a 30-year-old when I went to medical school, and I think I was the old guy. But anyway, still staying strong. So I don't know, Zach, do we have an introduction yet and all that stuff? Sorry, I came in late.
Yeah, no worries. We've just kind of been chatting. So I hit record though, so we got it.
Okay, cool. So I know. How do you like to be called? Do you go by Gabrielle or Gabby, or what do you call?
Yeah.
Gabrielle. Okay, I didn't want to.
No, Gabby.
No, Gabby. All right, gotcha. Gabrielle. Hey, so I see that one of the things that I like that I've seen that you say is you practice something called muscle-centric medicine, which I think is wonderful. Wonderful term, and I think it says a lot. And it's just very, very positive. The muscle is an organ. I mean, we don't understand that muscles are actually organs, and we worry about our hearts and we worry about our livers and kidneys, but really, muscle, other than our skin, skin's the largest organ in our body, but our muscles are right up there as far as having hormonal effects, and they interact with things. So tell me a little bit about your philosophy, how you got to where you are, and let's just chat.
So muscle-centric medicine came about actually I did 17 years of formal education, and my godmother, her name is Liz Lipsky, and she's kind of one of the OGs.
Hang on, I got to interrupt you, Gabby. Yeah. You said 17 years of formal education. Does that include kindergarten and high school and all that stuff? Because you can't be old enough to have 17 years of formal education.
17 years of formal education.
Wow. Goodness.
So my godmother, so I graduated high school early. So I started kind of academics early. And I moved in with my godmother, her name is Liz Lipsky, and she was a nutritionist. So that I started seeing how nutrition played a massive role in changing people's lives, right? So she would have cancer patients, all these patients come in. And so that changed the trajectory of my life. I then went to study human nutrition, vitamin, mineral, metabolism, and that was my undergrad. And I know that Zach mentioned you guys had Stu Phillips on. Well, I was trained by Dr. Donald Layman, and he is one of the protein experts in the world, right? He is old school, he'd kill me for saying that, but he's been doing this over 30 years.
Yeah, I had a little debate with Lane Norton, and he was also, I guess.
Yes, so actually Lane and I were in the same
gotcha.
lab. So when Lane was a graduate student, I was an undergrad. So we came out of the same lab. Our philosophies in terms of protein are probably pretty similar, although I skew towards a higher protein intake. I'm not nearly as moderate, and I think you and I are very much in alignment with that, just from what I've seen with my clinical practice. So I trained under Donald Layman, who is still my mentor to this day. Scary, 20 years later, still my mentor. Then I decided to go to medical school because actually I went to University of Illinois, and there was a tornado warning. Have you ever been in a fallout shelter?
When I was actually my residency, I was in Galveston, and we had it was after Hurricane Katrina. It was the next big one. It was called Irma or something like that, and I had to hide in the hospital basement because I was one of the ones that stayed to help man casualties. Of
course you were, right?
Yeah,
massive man tasking. So there was this tornado. We were down there for hours, and I realized that if I just studied nutrition, I was fucking useless. There was nothing I was going to be able to do. At that moment, I decided I need to go to medical school. So I went to osteopathic school. I was very interested in sports. I was a competitive dance, gymnastics, and track, and I played some soccer. So after that, I went to medical school, almost quit, tried to quit, hated it so bad, and then did 2 years of residency in psychiatry, and then family medicine, 3 years, and then a 2-year fellowship at WashU in St. Louis in nutritional sciences, obesity medicine, and geriatrics.
Interesting background. Yeah. So now tell me a little bit about your current practice then, because you said, you're seeing, using more protein seems to benefit, the people you're taking care of. Who are you taking care of, and what kind of strategies are you using?
Overall, the big common factor of all my patients is they want to level up. I don't have any complainers in my practice. I have really hard chargers. I see a lot of elite military operators, SEALs, Green Berets, Rangers. I see military from Canada, and I see a lot of executives, athletes. So that's kind of one huge group. And then the other group is, like I said, it's more of a mentality. They don't have to be an incredible athlete, but they are all very passionate about being relentless for their health. And as a physician, I am relentless about getting what they want for themselves, right? So the first, meeting is kind of an interview. Either we're in or we're out. If you're sitting in front of me and you're telling me you can't give up carbs and all these things, you're out of my office. That's it. one and done.
That's a nice luxury. You know, it's kind of funny. I imagine a lot of physicians are like they'd like to fire a lot of patients because you know, it's you know,
Yeah.
that sort of population you have is obviously not the general population. In a lot of cases, there's a lot of people that you got to drag kicking and screaming to make.
I don't see the general population. My practice, you know, I think that the practitioner will attract kind of a tribe of individuals. And I think that I know that the individuals who show up at my door, the average number of physicians that they've seen is 12 before they get to me. I'm cash pay only. I don't take any insurance. And my waiting list is at least a month and a half, you know, which isn't that long, but long enough where, you know, they want to get in, they're ready to commit. Yeah.
If they've got to wait 6 months, they may decide to go somewhere else. So that's probably
right. So I try to keep it so the wait is only a month and a half, and that's just part of the medical practice. So if it's out too long, then you know you adjust. But anyway, so they're willing to work, right? I don't get Navy SEALs in there telling me they can't do this. That's just not how that works.
Yeah, no, I know the mentality. Believe me, I've lived it for a long time myself. But so, you know, but many of the things that you are practicing, I would imagine, would have applications to those people that you know aren't the sort of hard charging elite people, just the average people. So let's get into how you quote unquote level people up, because I'm interested in myself, because I'm always interested in getting better. Maybe I'll pick up something here.
Okay. So like I had mentioned before, that the average number of physicians my patients see before they get to me is about 12. A lot of them have struggled with weight issues or hormone issues for many years. I see a lot of fatigue, digestive issues, you name it, I see it. And sometimes they're really odd things. But at the end of the day, the first thing that I look at is nutrition, right? You can't out-train, out-diet. If your fundamentals are wrong, then you're not going to get better, right? And I also see a lot of individuals that have been dieting for a long time. So when they get into my office, of course, it's nutrition we will discuss on the first session. And then you're getting a whole hormone panel, thyroid, everything. And we go from there. And the first thing that we do is all of my patients are put on a high protein diet. And, you know, we think about high protein as something above the average. It should actually just be an optimal protein diet, because we know that the RDA came up with 0.8 grams per kilogram. And, you know, if you follow those guidelines, the trajectory of your aging is terrible, right? So you will break a hip, you will be osteoporotic, you will never recover from anything. So the first thing I have them do is I teach them not to listen to the guidelines.
Good for you.
Yeah, a quick question, Gabrielle, with when it comes to protein, if you had a client come in and kind of say, like, what is the hierarchy of protein food sources that I should focus on? Do you kind of have like a list that you say, well, here's the high quality stuff that I would really recommend, you know, and then you can kind of move down the scale if needed? Is that something that you implement?
Absolutely. So if I can be a little crass here with you gentlemen, if you don't,
hang on. Let me strap my big boy pants on here. I'm going to get.
I mean, I don't want to offend anyone, but the truth of the matter is, if you don't have to kill it, and if it doesn't run, fly, or swim, suppose eggs and whey are different, then you know, it's not a quality protein source. So it's really gravity-bearing proteins, animals.
Okay. So
and it becomes very emotional for people, because the sources of protein I recommend are those with a face. And I think because, you know, we talk about sustainability and this emotional tie to protein, you know, we really are not clear in terms of our education. So the emotion skews education. And just like with the military, if you become emotional, right? You're an operator. If you become emotional, then it skews your ability to make good decisions.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree. There's definitely a lot of emotion tied up in many things, and nutrition is no different. In fact, it's almost, it becomes religious for some people. You know, and Don Layman, I'm sure would be happy with your belief that animal protein is better. I mean, I've seen some of his recent papers talking about that, and certainly we know that, you know, for instance, whey protein probably, you know, arguably is the best, you know, bioavailable protein out there. And then obviously followed by the rest of the animal proteins. And then probably if you go to the plant kingdom, perhaps people might say soy would be the next best source, although it's got all kinds of issues with problems with protease inhibitors and questionable concerns around phytoestrogens and stuff like that. But
Right.
let me ask you, so you got these people on a high protein, a higher protein diet. Obviously, they're eating optimal protein diet. Obviously, they're eating some meat here, or quite a bit probably. Do you find a dichotomy between the needs of women and men with regard to this? Because there's a lot of women out there that are under the impression that, that's men food. And we really, we really need to stick to our salads and a little bit of strip of chicken. And how do you deal with that mentality?
Well, typically I ask them if what they've done for them in the past 20 years has worked. So they'll come in and say, oh, well, I have a little chicken salad and I have this. And I say, okay, well, has that worked for you? Now I'm a tiny female. I'm about 120 pounds. I eat 2 pounds of ground beef a day. And I show it to them, right? And then my snacks in between are protein. And, if they know what they've done in the past hasn't worked, it's they're willing to change. And also, when you look at the science, it's really based on blood volume and lean muscle mass, the goal of lean muscle mass. But the protein intake at one time, I know you've talked to Stu Phillips and you've read Donald Layman's work, the protein intake at one time, you need to reach a threshold so that you stimulate muscle protein synthesis. And that is not based on male, female. It's not based on the amount of lean muscle mass. It's really, at the end of the day, the amount of leucine in the blood at any one time, right? And we know that that's 2.5 grams. So that's a good point, because there's a lot of confusion. Say, oh, women need less. Well, it's not that women need less. It's that the size of the individual will determine how much they need. In addition, the distribution does not change depending on the size.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily the science anywhere indicates that women need any less than men. It's just the cultural expectations. We have this sort of I think it's a cultural thing. And I think there's a lot of, and it's good to see women like you that are thriving can dispel some of those myths. Let me ask you, speaking about, the protein requirements, because I know Stu Phillips and those guys are saying for muscle protein synthesis, they're talking 1.6 grams per kilo. Although I just saw another study coming out of there that I can't remember who's published it, but I know a guy named, I think it's Jacob Wilson was talking about one where they saw better growth even up to 2.8 grams per kilo, which is pretty much what bodybuilders, the guys are putting on muscle eat anyway. So it just kind of goes up with kind of our observations. So it's kind of very interesting. Let me ask you, so you get these people on a high protein diet. What are the results? I mean, what are you seeing results with?
So I always measure inflammatory markers, HSCRP, SED rate, all of them go down. And I also track lean body mass over adipose tissue, which is interesting. I have this concept that, we always talk about being over fat, but that's not the problem. It's really under muscled, because as you said earlier, muscle is an organ and it's the largest organ in our body. The average pounds of weight loss obviously depends on how much they have to lose and how well-trained an individual is. Like for someone like you're already on a high protein diet. If we were to tweak certain things, it'd be really challenging for you to continue to lose body fat. But the less trained an individual is, the more body fat, obviously, the faster they lose weight. But my patients they could lose easily over 10 pounds in a month, depending on how heavy they are. I mean, it is, and they come back to me and they're like, Doc, I'm not hungry. That binge eating at night, that getting up in the middle of the night, they're no longer doing it. Their digestion is better. Their energy levels are better. They're not having these ebbs and flows in blood sugar, because we know that a high protein diet allows the body to metabolically generate its own carbohydrate, right? So they're not dependent on external dietary carbohydrates. Don and I were talking, and, we're talking about protein in terms of, for every 100 grams of protein, you make 60 grams of carbohydrates. And it's this slow, steady kind of influx, as opposed to an ebb and flow in blood sugar, which makes individuals emotional because then they're hungry or they're hangry or they're tangry, you name it.
Yeah, I've seen actually a number of even type 1 diabetics that are on a high or even an all meat diet, which I often have people see results on it. And when they show me their continuous glucose monitor reading, it's like a flat line. I mean, there's almost zero significant variability there at all. And I think that, again, the point you make is when you make your own glucose, it's pretty well regulated. Glucose is still a crucial molecule that we need in our physiology. But the fact that you can you can so exquisitely and tightly regulate it via making it is a huge advantage, is what I've seen. Let me talk about the importance or lack of importance of fat in the diet. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect?
I will. I tend not to be fat heavy. And this is from experience. I mean, we do have essential fatty acids. Our needs are not that tremendous. You can get that from, a fat supplement or just having a little extra. You can have some omegas in your diet. From my clinical practice, so I was at WashU doing my fellowship for 2 years. I ran a weight management clinic. That's part of the responsibility as a fellow. We get all those responsibilities. And we saw a lot of metabolic issues with women on ketogenic diets. They had a nice honeymoon phase for about 4 weeks. And then the majority of the women were ballooned up. Were not able to lose weight, were putting on fat. And this is very tightly controlled. WashU is a phenomenal institution. They have a ton of resources. So for high fat diets, it's really not something that I recommend. And I've seen a lot of men have hormonal issues in long periods of ketogenic diets. But I mean, I think if you have the physiology, there's something to be said for it, because all of these people wouldn't be doing well on it if that was the case. Zach, I know you are a high fat endurance athlete. So, again, I think it comes down to the individual biochemistry of the person.
Yeah, I think and we're seeing this as this sort of ketogenic community evolves. I think part of the fact is, not to sort of take any credit here, but I know that the fact that we see so many people eating, basically a bunch of meat, still making ketones, eating a bunch of protein is starting to shift the conversation a little bit. And I know classically, many people were just so enamored with getting so much fat. I mean, just drinking extra calories and fat. And, I think, in my view, while, fat has some nutrition and there are some nutrients in there, just that tremendous bolus of high density calories is not always in your favor. And, it's still, I tell people protein, a meat heavy or protein diet is definitely got some advantages from a metabolic standpoint, but it's still not an all you can eat buffet. You still have to work within a framework. And even though you may be at an advantage, and for many people that advantage is simply just enough. They can just eat to satiety and everything works out. But there is a limit on all these things. And I think that's a nuance that a lot of people seem to lose a little bit.
I think that's a really good point. And I also think that we don't know. I think there's a lot of data that support sarcopenic obesity and sarcopenia as we age in terms of protein needs being a minimum of double. I think that we don't have data to support or to guide us in terms of ketogenic diets and aging. So muscle is your metabolic currency. And we know that from what I understand, the ketogenic diets are muscle sparing, but you don't want to just be muscle sparing. As you age, you want to continue to stimulate that tissue and build. I think that becomes a real problem when you look at the geriatric community and those entering into older age with the change in activity levels and change of hormones becomes massive.
Yeah, you touched on, the role of leucine in muscle protein synthesis. Obviously, I think there's pretty good evidence now that shows that's probably the main trigger as far as, if you're going to get some protein, make sure it has some leucine in there. But let's talk a little bit about, why as we age do those protein requirements go up, do you think? I know some people just have a hard time absorbing it. And I don't know if it's just a lack of absorption or if there's something beyond that. We see these people, the typical example, you don't see a lot of real huge fat people making it to 90 years old because they just die before that. But I mean, you see these skinny, frail, and every 90-year-old woman or 100-year-old woman I'd ever seen was, they lay there from the stretcher as I met them with their broken hip, telling me how miserable they were. Don't ever live to be 100. And so we see this. This is our, this is what we expect for aging. I would argue that may not necessarily be the path that everybody needs to take. Talk about, what we can do from an aging standpoint, besides just eating more protein. Is there anything else we can do to try to prevent this sort of from happening?
Let's take a look at what goes wrong and what changes as you age. Number one, when you just think about the fundamental baseline absorption and ability to break down, stomach acid decreases as you age. And we know that. So we know that the capacity to break down and absorb protein goes down. The other aspect of that is individuals will begin to consume less protein. I've heard so many times in the geriatric clinics that I've worked in that they feel really tired and heavy after they eat. So individuals, and also chewing becomes an issue. So there is this protein inversion that happens. That begins as the body changes. So the protein intake that individuals typically, as they age, they reduce their protein intake naturally because they're not supplementing with betaine, hydrochloric acid, those kinds of things. The other thing that happens is there's a decrease in splanchnic extraction. So the uptake of amino acids in the blood is less. So that's the second thing that happens. And then the third thing that happens is anabolic resistance in the muscle. As muscle ages, it changes. Unfortunate but true. This may be different for individuals who are always active. We don't know. But from what we know now, anabolic resistance is the requirement of more amino acids, a higher level to then trigger that muscle protein synthesis. And in general, higher levels of amino acids at one time to begin these metabolic processes, because the body, we become insulin resistant. You can become, in a way, amino acid resistant. Not exactly in that way, but you do require more. So as you age, these, it's stacked against you if you continue to eat the way you did in your 20s and 30s, and also train in a similar way if they're doing a lot of cardio and non-heavy weight-bearing activities, which a lot of individuals who age tend to shy away from.
I wonder, Gabrielle, I wonder why, for instance, the issue with decreased hydrochloric acid production, because I know there's a lot of people that take proton pump inhibitors, because they have reflux and stuff like that. But I mean, I wonder what is the intrinsic thing that's going on that generally causes that, and if it's avoidable. And my suspicion is it may just be, a consequence of just a general decline that occurs based on years of a crappy diet. And I think maybe, because I eat a shit ton of meat every day, and I got no problem. And I'm in my 50s. Right. And, I got zero problem digesting that stuff. And so I just wonder, if that's something that's recoverable. That's the other question. If and I think just on observation, I do think it may be to some degree. So it's kind of an interesting to talk about.
Yeah, I don't know. That definitely inspires me to look it up and see what is available on that. I don't know if things are recoverable, but it would make sense that the body could adapt. And as you begin to increase the protein intake, that the body could then adapt. I don't know in terms of that. So one of the things that becomes really important as you age is that protein bolus. We want to talk about Don Layman. He has 50 grams of protein per meal.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about that, because I think sometimes when people think about protein, they typically kind of gravitate towards two maybe different looks at it. And one is how much protein am I going to get in a specific meal versus how much protein should I get or am I going to get in a day? Do you mind sharing with us kind of what your thoughts are on that? Is it a big deal if you're getting your protein quota by the end of the day, or should that be kind of spaced out? And if spaced out, is there a kind of a target number to aim for to try to generate, say, an anabolic response versus just too small to really induce that?
Absolutely. As an individual ages, so let's take a step back. When you're young, you can do whatever you want and you're going to get results. You could be a complete moron, lift weights, eat Twinkies, and be ripped, jacked and tan, no problem. College, I've seen it all the time. When you're young, you have dietary flexibility. So you actually require less dietary protein because you are driven by hormones, growth hormone, testosterone, even insulin. So getting away with less protein, it doesn't really matter whether you're having a little bit under the leucine threshold per meal, as long as you're reaching some kind of quality protein in a 24-hour period. Doesn't mean that it'll be optimal body composition, but you certainly can still build because you are making up for it with hormones and age. Something interesting happens. When an individual ages, they typically take the habits in their 20s and they push that forward to the habits in their 50s, 40s and 50s. As decrease in stomach acid happens, as increase in anabolic resistance happens, the body protein need actually goes up. So you have total amount of protein typically goes up. Injury, stress, I see, there's data to suggest that individuals with GI infections, parasites, all of those require higher protein. What happens is you then have to split up the amount of protein that you eat per meal. The amino acids in the blood per meal to reach that threshold at, say, 2.5 grams to begin that muscle protein synthesis process becomes necessary if you want to continue to maintain and grow your muscle as you age. And that process starts at 30 grams. It doesn't max out till likely 50. So my recommendation for individuals as they age would be to really hit 30 to 50 grams per meal, and to then decide on the per meal, and then to decide on the quality of the protein is the next thing, and then the overall amount. Mm-hmm. Actually, I would say you probably pick the overall amount, then you distribute it appropriately, and then you have the amount of quality. So it has to be of a quality amount. For anabolic, and actually as an individual ages, we know that when you resistance train, you increase blood flow to the muscle. So following a resistance training for an older individual to then have protein right after a meal, you actually can get away with less protein, but that would be an ideal time.
Yes, that was going to kind of be my follow-up question too, because when we're getting up to numbers in the 50-gram range, to me, I'm kind of trying to process in my head what that looks like on a plate. And when I think of an animal-based protein meal, 50 grams is not that difficult to hit. I probably exceed that quite often, especially when I'm eating fewer, larger meals.
It's about 7 ounces.
Sure. Yeah. So now you flip that over and say, if I was going to do that from a plant-based standpoint, I'm kind of juggling two things at that point. I have to try to hit that number, but I probably actually need to go a fair bit above that because I'm not getting these complete proteins. So I have to be really careful about how I'm mixing, and then probably overshooting by enough just to make sure those combinations are matching out to get that 50 grams of complete protein.
So you'd want to increase, if you're plant-based, 25 to 35%, which then of course correlates with a large increase in carbohydrates. The other way to avoid that is to hit your protein goal from a plant-based and then add in a branched chain amino acid. Also can work. 2% of the population does amazing plant-based. It's a very small amount. And one of the reasons they believe that is that there's some research that's coming out that the microbiome, that the bugs actually break down and begin to produce the essential amino acids in about 2% of the population.
I try not to get too involved in some of the arguments on Twitter and wherever else when it comes to vegan, omnivore / carnivore. Although I do find them very fascinating, and I can't help but think sometimes when I'm looking at it, it's do we have a person here who kind of fits that 2% bill, and then someone who's on the opposite of that spectrum, and if they would even try to eat that same diet, they would just be met with all these negative consequences. And you have these two people trying to project their experience on one another, and it's impossible for them to kind of see the view from the other person's angle, and you just end up going back and forth. And at the end of the day, my conclusion usually ends up being that there are no absolutes, but there's definitely a lot of, valuable information out there that you can glean from, and then ultimately trying it and seeing how you feel is probably the way to go. But then, keeping a careful eye on the science and the stuff that you're presenting is, I think, important as well in terms of if trying to optimize and making sure you're not selling yourself short.
And I think that the science is really slow. I think that the concept of a carnivore diet works phenomenal. Anyone with any kind of, autoimmune infection, there's all sorts of things that I've seen that they do really well on. But I don't think that we have the science yet to support it, but we will. Eventually we will, just like we've had it to support all these other nutritional ventures,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think sometimes it's you almost need the pendulum to swing one way in order for the motivation to get for the other side. So with some of this stuff, we see this Eat Lancet stuff coming out and saying, eat your 1/8 ounce of meat a day or whatever it's advocating for. Now all of a sudden there's incentive for folks who are in the labs who kind of know what the protein synthesis stuff it all entails to maybe start continuing to dive in, or take divers or get motivated to dive into this more, and so that we have accurate information out there for people.
Yeah. And I think ultimately because of costs. And, I think ultimately what is going to happen, and I was talking to Don about this, is we probably will have a blended protein source for those that can't afford it, because, it definitely is expensive, right? It's not more expensive than your health, but I think that it is cost prohibitive to a lot of individuals. So. Yeah,
it's going to be interesting to see, how things play out over the next decade or so. It's just, as there's definitely some very passionate people on kind of both sides of the argument. I am very kind of disturbed when I see, a recommendation for a diet that's, by calorie, 53% grain, added sugar, and seed oils. To me, that's a disaster.
It's ridiculous. I can't believe anyone's even having that conversation or entertaining.
But that is being pushed and embraced, by media all over the place. And you just have to see the, who sponsored some of this stuff. And it's, all these, processed food companies. And you wonder, you wonder about that sort of stuff. And it's disheartening to think that people are just kind of not even questioning that in a large degree. And there's people out here like us. Sometimes I feel like John the Baptist out there out in the wilderness screaming, trying to say, look, this is great.
No way. I am totally here to support you. I think that a lot of the things that you say are absolutely right on. And what I see, I've seen thousands of patients, and this is what I see in my clinical practice. So.
Yeah, it's good to see more and more practitioners. And, as I've been doing this, I've seen more and more physicians that have said, okay, I'm just going to test it out. And by and large, particularly for certain patients, they're seeing really good results. And so if anything, we can utilize it as a quote unquote meat-based diet. If you want to coin a term, instead of using plant-based, a meat-based diet can be utilized very effectively for a whole host of conditions. And as I've said repeatedly, and many people say, well, you can't do it for your whole life, or the whole planet can't be on it. And no one's really advocating for that. We're just saying use it as a tool. If it works for you and you like it and you want to keep doing it, I think that's fine too. But at the end of the day, I'm more interested in results, and I'm sure you are. I'm sure your patients appreciate it. They want results. They don't care about philosophy. They want it. They want to, at the end of the day, when the rubber meets the road, they want to feel better. They want to perform better. And
absolutely.
Now for a word from our sponsors. This episode of HPO Podcast is brought to you by a company named Fat Snacks. That's Fat Snacks with an X. Fat Snacks is a company that makes a cookie that is keto, low carb, and high fat. They use ingredients like almond flour, coconut flour, and butter to make a soft baked cookie with 1 to 2 net grams of carbs and 8 grams of fat per cookie. It comes in flavors such as chocolate chip, lemon, and peanut butter. This personally is an option that I've used in the past when I'm traveling, when I'm in a situation where I might be busy and on the go for quite some time, and just there's a scarcity of what I would consider high quality food options. This is a great thing that's easy to pack and bring along and get you out of a pinch in a situation like that. I also see this as a really great option for parents with children who want to send them to school, to practice, or to a friend's house, and don't want them to overdo some of the more traditional options that are sugar and vegetable oil based cookies. If you'd like to check out this product, please head over to their website at fatsnacks.com, and with the promo code HPO, you can get 5% off your first single order or 10% off a subscription order. Also, if you get a chance, head over to Instagram and Facebook and give them a follow or a shout out at Eat Fat Snacks, and let them know that HPO is very grateful for their support. Now, back to the show.
Talk to me about some of the sort of interesting sort of patients you might have had, without obviously revealing their identities, but and some of the things that you may not have expected to have gotten better via nutrition, before you really knew anything about it.
In terms of their conditions, or in terms of the nutrition, because I've always implemented high protein. That's always been fundamental.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of conditions out there that we, for example, autoimmune disease. We basically, the answer is it's idiopathic. We just don't know. And so now you're seeing.
You mean in terms of what I've seen in my clinic?
Right, exactly.
Okay. There's one woman that comes to mind, and she had actually tried for 20 years to lose weight. When she came to see me, she brought a stack of books. She probably had 15, 20 nutrition books based on different diets. And she actually, I had her, I examined her, and I had her see a tropical medicine specialist. She had whipworm and Entamoeba histolytica. She had traveled out of the country, so she had 2 significant pathogens. She also was eating kosher, and she, looking at her hormones, she was thyroid resistant. So her reverse T3 was through the roof. I put her on a largely protein-based nutrition plan and really scaled everything else out. She lost, I would say, since she's been with me, she's lost about 50 pounds. And within the first, 3 months, easily lost 30 pounds of fat. We're talking body fat only. And it was like that. There wasn't a huge change in her exercise routine. There wasn't anything outside the normal other than shifting up her nutritional composition, treating her for 2 parasites and thyroid resistance.
Did you significantly reduce her caloric intake at the same time, or was it just the protein? Yeah, because that's one of the things. Yeah, that's one of the things people will talk about. It's you have to be in a deficit, and I think that's also a confusing term, because a deficit can mean a different thing when your nutritional composition is different. I think protein is a huge lever that can, you can eat more of it, and that can change where you're at a deficit. So I think the whole concept of calories mattering, again, we talked about that. It still does, but I mean, you can be in a deficit eating more calories if more calories come from protein.
Right. And we do know that there's an increased thermal effect of feeding, and we know that protein intake, leucine increases fatty acid utilization, arginine helps with NO2 production, vasodilation, blood pressure, all of these things. I did reduce her carbohydrates, but she was largely calorie controlled. Her calories didn't change. I reduced her fat. I changed her pre and post nutrition timing. I put her on time restricted feeding. So she would eat in an 8 to 9 hour window, and it was like magic for her. She is amazing. She is a very high powered woman. So she is very prominent in the community here in New York. And that's just one example. I have Hashimoto's patients that come in plant-based, they're doing the juice press, they're eating so healthy, all of this stuff, and their antibody numbers are through the roof. You put them on a high protein diet, reduce their carbohydrates, even reduce their vegetables, right? I mean, vegetables are carbohydrates and can be inflammatory for people. Can't tell you why that is, but this is what I see in clinical practice.
Yeah, I mean, I've obviously seen that observation as well. So, I mean, I guess to say, the people that are engaging in all these juice cleanses and, these, smoothie detoxes, that you would not be a particular fan of that, I'm guessing.
I'm not. And, my practice is a combination of integrative medicine. And so, I use the best of Western medicine and the best of integrative medicine. What is also very important to me is to have integrity as a scientist and to have integrity as someone who is very highly educated, to give that to my patients. So if, for example, I'm going to recommend something, a supplement or some kind of modality that is outside, say, conventional medicine, you better believe that I'm looking at the data for it.
Let me ask you what, just because nutrition is one piece of the puzzle, obviously, and it's a very big part of the puzzle. I think probably arguably the largest part for many people. What percentage of the people that you take care of, you just fix their nutrition and that solves it, versus, what percentage needs some more additional stuff? And let's talk about the additional stuff that you might have to do.
Yeah. So if I were to think about percentages, I would say, depending on the length of time the issue has gone on, what I found is the longer that there has been an issue, the more additional therapies you'll use. I'll use Saxenda, GLP-1 agonist. I'll use phentermine if I need to, if I put them on a fast, right? So depending on if their BMI is a certain amount, the treatment has to match the severity of the illness overall. So if someone has been coming in for, a couple months, not feeling well, a year, hey doc, I've really put on weight, then nutritional interventions can work. But I would say the majority of the time, it's not only nutrition. But that my patients self-select. So they've been to 12 other physicians. They've tried everything. And typically it is not just nutrition. They've dieted forever. Their thyroid numbers are messed up. They're not sleeping. Their hormones are messed up. All of those things that need to be treated.
How do you see the role of exercise? And what do you sort of recommend for your patients? Is it tailored for specific patients? Do men have to do something different than women?
Yes. All my patients lift weights. If you're not willing to do the heavy work, you're out. There is no, Pilates is great. We do not count Pilates as exercise. Yoga is great. I do not count yoga as exercise. If you are not picking heavy things up and putting it down, you are not training.
I have to say that makes me smile. It's because I see all, and I think it's fine if people want to do yoga, but I mean, if I had a finite amount of time to do my exercise, yoga would not be at the top of my list of things I would do to get things done.
And it's amazing, we might get a lot of pushback from this. These are all wonderful things to do in addition, right? It's like having a house. That is all window dressing. If your fundamentals are not in place, you are not working hard enough where you're suffering a little bit. So micro suffering is important depending on what your training schedule is. You should be lifting heavy weights depending on your training status. I outsource to people that I think are great programmers. People spend their entire life doing this. So I always, we talk about the fundamental core compound movements and lifting heavy enough. And then I outsource it so that I know that they're doing it and that they are working with someone who is pushing them, and all my trainers are vetted and they're the best.
Yeah, I was looking on your website a bit, and that was one thing that kind of caught my eye was you talked about there's the difference between exercise and movement. And we've touched on that a little bit here, but I think it's worth diving into a little more, just because a lot of times people do kind of couple those into the same category where, a 30-minute walk becomes exercise versus movement, and they all lumped together. And then there's not necessarily, I think that one of the biggest issues I see when we look at movement in general is it's kind of this nebulous, like undocumented, unmetric, like, there's no tangible really to it. It's not like, oh, I went into the gym for 3 weeks and I've been doing this strength protocol that the trainer put me on, and now I can lift X number of pounds more. I think there's a lot more you can kind of goal oriented towards what I would consider true exercise versus just movement.
Right.
Could you share with us like how that conversation kind of takes place with someone who comes into you for the first time when you start like unpacking that? How do you look at like, here's what you're doing, here's what I want you to do, this is exercise, this is movement?
Right. So the basics, so I take them back to kind of what the ancestors do, and my dad, who's in his 70s, he won't take public transportation if it's 3 hours or under. So if it takes him 3 hours or more walking to get there, he'll take public transportation. So there's this concept of, we think that 10,000 steps is enough, and we have these, we're domesticated. We are a weak society. We are domesticated. We take the escalator, the elevators, we're very softened. And I think that the first conversation that we have, when I talk to my patients, it's like, okay, so what are you doing? On a very fundamental level. And if they're telling me they're walking for exercise, and I say, so we have this conversation of, well, what were the people back in the day doing? In order to age in a way that will support us, you have to put in some effort, grit, and resilience, right? So strength is earned. So you take away, if they're walking, 10,000 steps, that's just to live, right? It should be 20,000. So I have them always, you can't change what you don't track. So everything is tracked. Their numbers are tracked. We're talking about, if I have some novice individuals that haven't lifted weights, I'll send them to, particular trainers in the area, or I'll coordinate someone with someone where they live, So that's number one. I can give you, if there's listeners in New York, I use Don Saladino. You have the Dog Pound, Hallaby Life. There's all these amazing places. And then for remote programming, Lane Norton, I use Kara Lazowskis. She's a Titan Games athlete. She's amazing. So you have kind of direct discussion with these people, and, you plan it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other thing that stuck out to me about your description too, was you talked about the why. And I think that is so important. I use that in my own coaching and consulting, because when someone comes to me, most people are coming to me for endurance related stuff. Sometimes I'll get people coming to me because they want to know like how I implement a high fat diet, low carb diet, or whatever you want to call it, into a training program. But whenever the topic of exercise comes up, if it's not very clear, like what their why is, we dig into that, because, sometimes you'll have someone who's like, they go out and they're running because they think that's what they're supposed to do. Right. When they really should just be in the gym based on what their actual why is or what their actual goals are. So really unpacking the motivation behind something. And the way I preface that to the folks that come to me specifically for ultra marathon is we look at like, in ultra marathon running, there's such a variety of things you can do. You can do something that's 50 kilometers. You can do stuff that's 6 days long. You can do stuff that's flat on a 400-meter track.
It's really for the weak and feeble is what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, the folks who have time on their hands is what it's for. But it's funny to me because like people will come in and they'll want to train for a specific event. And, but sometimes they don't necessarily enjoy the process of getting to that event. So we usually try to back up at that point and say, well, what do you want to be doing in this 16 weeks leading up to that event? Because that's how we should be deciding what you're going to do at the end of that. The end should be kind of more or less a celebration of all that hard work you did to get to it. So if the event you're trying to prepare for is the least exciting thing that you need to be doing to get ready for it, you should pick something else, or you're just going to have a miserable experience for something that maybe isn't even a true passion.
I think that is very well said. And in my own practice, mindset is 50%. I always know exactly where, being a female physician, you get away with a lot without getting punched in the face, right? So you can poke and you find the underbelly. For my patients, I don't care where they're strong. I only care about their weaknesses. I want to know where they fail in every domain of their life. Because when you start to unpack where they fail in, say, a standard operating procedure and the way that they're thinking about something, are they giving into temptation, right? Do they not have emotional discipline or emotional leadership within themselves? You kind of tease out where the individuals fail, and then you kind of unearth it and you poke at it. And by determining that, the why then falls into place and it really gets the best out of the patient.
I mean, I think that's a very, fascinating concept, and I mean, very, very smart to say, why do you fail and not worry about your strength? Let me shift gears a little bit and ask you about, because we all are kind of like, maybe we don't like a lot of carbohydrates, but how do you use carbohydrates in your practice? Tell me about how you use them.
If they feel they need it, I'll use it pre or post workout. It really all depends. I don't think that there is I know what the RDA is. I know what that they recommend, but I think that, like I said before, the body makes it. So for those that are naive to a high protein diet, I'll start them at 30 grams 3 times a day, and that can be carbohydrates to max of 30 grams of carbohydrates per meal, because we know really anything over 40 begins to push insulin a little too much. Also pull them off of fruit. And, we use complex carbohydrates depending on if they are protein adapted or they feel really weak, say the next day for recovery, then I'll add in a complex carbohydrate post-training, or I'll utilize their carbohydrates pre and post-training. But I can tell you with myself and the athletes that I see, it's all really dependent on the individual for sure. But the baseline answer to that is 90 grams of protein or 90 grams of carbohydrates separated 30 grams or less per meal.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that you're so sort of flippant about how not revering the RDAs. And, when I look at, how the RDAs were developed, I'm like, what population was it developed on? And, even the, Institute of Medicine, who reviewed that in 2007, said it's all expert opinion. And so I really think we're really kind of operating on assumptions that haven't really been proven. And so I think, the recommendation that we only eat, 0.8 grams of protein a day, is what we're hearing is just, it's just wrong in my view. So, it's kind of refreshing to see other people's, taking up the mantle and questioning that stuff. And more importantly, talking, walking the walk and saying, this is what's happening with actual people. And I think that's really awesome.
And all my patients will tell you they do it. They are not in my practice. There is a risk of being kicked out.
Yeah, I believe it. It sounds from talking to you, I believe they live in fear.
I will tell you, I have this very strong fundamental belief that I don't enable people, that I make them capable. And I think that the way in which our medical system is set up is to enable individuals. I refuse to do that.
Yeah, and a lot of times with that too, I think it's like the initial response to that is maybe a little being taken aback or feeling like they need to defend themselves. But over time, I find that like when you put someone in that position, they feel empowered because now they're making changes, and eventually they're making changes on their own, and they realize that, and they ultimately would come back and thank you, I would imagine.
They do. And ultimately, we never wait for motivation. We depend on discipline and commitment. And if I think they're really struggling, I expect a report at the end of the day. Did they follow their program? Yes or no? The answer is yes or no. If the answer is consistently no, you're out of my practice.
Let me ask you about, because you've been doing it for a while, I assume, what kind of sort of mistakes did you make early on that you later adapted and changed? Because we all learn.
I negotiated with my patients, and this is why I have such a strong fundamental belief that they either get on the program or they're out. So when I first started practicing and when I was in residency, I would negotiate with the patients. Well, they can't just make all these changes at once, or they need to do it a little bit. And I, over time, realized, I spent a lot of time thinking about those that are successful and those that fail. And the majority, 90+% of my patients are successful. And the reason is I've kind of cultivated the characteristics and been able to identify, after thousands of patients, what are the core ethos of these individuals versus the ones that fail. So initially in my practice, I was a lot more flexible with the patients. And I realized that flexibility really did them a disservice, because I would say, oh, well, you can cheat, or, oh, no, you don't really have to do this for your Hashimoto's, or, we can kind of negotiate. That never worked. And I would say that was the number one biggest thing, was negotiating in what I thought was best for them. I mean, of course, there is a dialogue that is, what a patient is willing to do versus not. But on some of the big things, they can't negotiate. No, you can't drink beer every night, or you can't drink beer 4 nights out of the week and get results. You can't be my patient. I cannot help you. For me to tell you that you are going to be successful and that's okay, it's not true.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the beer thing, because I constantly get people asking me, what alcohol works with the diet. I'm like, none. I mean, it doesn't matter what diet you're on. It's not a health food. And so I tell people that, and they, the one thing that I've found also peculiar is that, when people do make this change, and often a dietary change, that some of these other things, these habits like smoking and drinking too much alcohol, their desire for that stuff goes away, which I think is also pretty cool, which I don't know if you've seen some similar things like that.
Well, we know that protein is a fundamental building blocks for neurotransmitters. So we know that the higher protein, people talk about carbohydrates helping with serotonin and those kinds of things. But really, when you look at the fundamental building blocks of protein is the foundation for serotonin, melatonin, norepinephrine, all of them. So a higher protein diet definitely seems to calm down that kind of amped up addicted brain. And Heather Leidy did studies about that in terms of looking at brain imaging, and high protein meal being the first thing versus a high carbohydrate meal. We know that their cravings and desire to eat other things later on, 4 hours later, was less with a high protein meal.
How many, I guess, how many patients did you have to kick out of your practice, just out of curiosity?
I would say in the beginning more, not so much anymore. I would say out of every 100, there might be 2. By the time they get, the last time I negotiated, I have a patient that's addicted to chocolate, but I just love this girl, and I told her that if she's eating, I don't know if she's eating like 2 or 3 bars a day, I cannot help you. So the deal is, I don't want to waste your time and I don't want to waste my time. So that's kind of like one that's on the fence, and I love this girl, so I hope she can get her shit together.
How do you, I guess I'm just going to think about the day-to-day. How do you make people accountable? What are you using some kind of technology to do this, or how does it work for you in a day? Like, let me pretend I walk into your office and you interview me and say, yeah, you're not a dirtbag. I think you can stick to the program. How do you implement it? Just give me a day in the life for
All right. So by the time you walk out of my office, you'll have a plan. I'll have already determined what kind of patient you are. If you are an upholder, if you're a questioner, I'll kind of determine what your fundamental workings are. I think that you're a guy who's in the military, you'll execute, you're like my other SEALs or operators, you'll get it done. I don't have to babysit you. I will expect you to check in with me in 2 weeks. We'll have a follow-up in a month total, right? You'll let me know. If I know that you failed multiple times before, and I know that you need accountability, then I will expect a communication with you every day for the first month. You will be emailing me every day for the first month, yes or no. Did you follow it or did you not? And then I typically add in some kind of consequence. So for example, and these are for patients that really struggle with that internal drive, but really want to get better. So I had one patient, I'm going to try to really make this so I don't give away too much of it. I had one female patient who I work with other military operators, so SEALs and things. And she had an eating disorder. She had bulimia. And the deal was, and again, this is extreme, but she was really close to getting rid of it and being done with it. She'd been working on it for years. And I said, here's the deal. Next time you fuck up, you're going to send a mass email to me, Master Commander, the other SEALs that we're working with, how you couldn't follow your plan. Do you think that she ever did it again?
Nope.
Nope. She never did it again. She never did it again. So the why, the consequence has to be so substantial, because ultimately when you run your mind, the mind is primary, right? So if you can run that organ well, you can do whatever it is. So if there's a consequence that is great enough, you will get yourself together. So I typically will put in a consequence like that. I'll have, sometimes they'll have them call their family members that they haven't talked to in 10 years, and I'll say, okay, I want evidence that you called and spoke to this person. So it's, they tend to be very truthful. So it's really about implementing a consequence. So again, if you're a patient that I know will execute, I don't need to babysit you. But I do want to get for you what you want for yourself. So if I know you need more help, then we'll get it done. Whatever it is, we will get it done.
How many patients are you seeing a day typically? What's a normal day for you?
I see patients 3 days a week from 10 to 5, usually an hour-long visit. So whatever that is, sometimes it's a half an hour follow-up. So whatever that is per day, if that's, 6 patients, 7 patients per day. I will be closing my practice in terms of how many people I will be letting in. What I will do is I'm going to be moving to a membership model where I will take care of a certain amount. It'll allow me to have more time to do the other things and also more time to just be solely focused on those in my practice.
Yeah, I'm sure your patients appreciate that. I know when I was, practicing as a busy orthopedic surgeon, I would get 5-6 minutes with many of them. I'd often have, a 15-minute block, and there's 3 patients I'm supposed to see in that time. And, some of them are just post-op follow-ups, and you walk in there, you look at their incision, you say, yeah, man, everything's good. Any problems? No. Okay, get the hell out of here. We'll see you in 2 weeks type of thing. But it is so much nicer to have time to spend, an hour talking with somebody. I think it makes such a big difference.
And I love my patients. I love my people. I think that the individuals that come to my clinic are incredible individuals.
Yeah, and I think too with that, like when you can have a situation where you're not just seeing a different person on a very frequent basis and kind of going over the same basic fundamental things, it's just so much more fulfilling from your end of it too. I know from my experience when I get like a coaching client or an ongoing consult client that we've been working together for 6+ months, you start to really start to have interesting discussions and digging into things like a lot deeper than you would ever be able to from a one and done type of setup.
Yeah. And I really genuinely care about them. And most of them don't just think of me as their physician. And I don't just think of them as patients. I absolutely treat them like their family.
Yeah, that's an awesome thing. What, how many, you said you do some of it by remote. What percentage of your practice is remote, and how does that work, or none, or is it none?
So I see everyone in person once. I like to do a physical exam. I'd like to see them. I'd like to get a sense of who they are. And the way that I can best serve them is I need to see them once in person. After that, I don't need to see them again. A lot of people come in from all over the country. But the majority of patients like to come in. So I would say, 90% of my patients love to come in, and they'll fly back. They'll fly back to see me. We'll chat. It's good to have face-to-face connection. I am going to start to offer consulting where, again, if I haven't seen you in person, I'm not prescribing hormones or any of that other stuff, but I will consult with you for your other physicians. So that is something that I will be offering in the future.
Talk to me a little bit about, some of the lab works you do, and what do you find to be helpful in these situations? Because, like I said, some of these things require just a little bit more work.
I think the fundamental, I tend to order a lot of blood work because I like to have a really big picture. So I always order a full hormone panel, estrogen, estradiol, testosterone-free total, albumin, sex hormone binding globulin, full thyroid panel, including the antibodies, reverse T3. I always do iron studies and ferritin. I don't do leptin as much anymore. I used to do fasting leptin levels to determine if they were leptin resistant. But the more that I did that, I found it more equated to body fat. So I found that less effective. I do full cholesterol panel, inflammatory markers. I will run something called an ion test, which is a test with, I don't know if you've seen those tests, but it has a full breakdown of nutrients, CoQ10, zinc, copper. We'll screen them for heavy metals, which I find a lot of metals, a lot of mercury, a lot of lead, especially with the military guys. And I'll do a Dutch test, which shows me hormone metabolites, not just the big ones, but also all the metabolites, cortisol metabolites, cortisone. What else? I think that pretty much covers it. Yeah, it's a lot of blood.
Let me ask you, one of the concerns with people eating a meat heavy, particularly red meat heavy diet, and I would assume that a lot of your patients eat steaks, is that it will cause problems with iron storage issues. Are you seeing that in practice? Because I'm not.
Yeah. I have never seen that in practice. The only individuals that I've ever seen I've never seen it.
Yeah, I've seen, my thought is we know that, iron overload is an issue, but it tends to run pretty closely with metabolic syndrome. And I think it's probably a reverse causation type issue, that probably having a screwed up metabolism tends to cause you to store more iron because, like I said, I've seen people that eat 3, 4, 5 pounds of red meat every day. And I mean, their iron levels are not out of they're normal. They're ferritin levels. And so they don't seem to be storing this stuff. So that's kind of interesting.
The one thing that I do see with a protein heavy diet, which I've experienced myself, is lower levels of potassium, magnesium, also vitamin C, those kinds of things, which they're easily supplemented.
Yeah, sure. Certainly they can if you need to do that. That's not hard to do that. Let me ask you, because you talked about, and this is something I don't really have a lot of knowledge on, you talk about the accumulation of heavy metals. How do you deal with that?
You have to put them through a chelation process. And there's a standard way of doing it. Typically, you screen them in the blood, and that's actually the standard of care. But what I found is that until you provoke a metal, so you give them a provoking agent, and then you actually do the urine test and you send it away for sampling, you oftentimes see heavy metals. When you get that, you either do IV chelation or oral chelation, and then you test them 60 to 90 days later. A lot of people with mercury in their mouth, they still have amalgams, really have to pull that out. And it affects fertility. So what we're seeing in the regular population as well as the military is that these kinds of weapons exposure, metals exposure tend to affect spermatogenesis and fertility.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm certainly aware of the chelation. I just didn't know how well it worked in practice.
It does work. It absolutely works. Arsenic, I don't know what I think about it. There's not a lot of good data. There's a lot of arsenic that can just show up in the food. Am I worried about that? No. But, I am worried about mercury and lead. Those are both pretty toxic.
What do you do personally with your own diet and exercise program? Just because, obviously, again, I think, when you go to it doesn't matter who you go to. If you go to a dentist and his teeth are all falling out, you're kind of like, man, maybe he's not the best guy. You go to a physician that's their supposed task is to get you fitter, leaner, healthier. You like to see that they can at least practice that in their own life. So tell me about your own personal routine, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I am an intermittent faster. I tend to use time restricted feeding. It just works well for me. So I typically train in the morning, and I've been working a lot more with kettlebells. I had some pretty substantial injuries that I've been working on healing over the past 2.5 years. It's taken quite some time. I ripped both hamstring, tore shoulder, labrum, piriformis as an orthopedic surgeon. I overachieved in that aspect. You shouldn't train with the military. It's really hard to keep up if you're a tiny female, but whatever. So in the mornings, I have a well laid out plan. I don't think that anything should be haphazard. So right now I'm working with Melissa Paris. Your listeners should check her out. She's amazing. So she's really strong, tiny little one. And we're doing a lot of kettlebells. So I'm doing a lot of kettlebell work, pull-up work. So that is, I train 5 days a week, with weights. I'd probably train more. I do allow for some recovery. And I do sauna. So I sauna 3 days a week. I do, in terms of cardio, I only do high intensity interval cardio, and that'll be 2 to 3 days a week. And everything is measured, whether it's a row or a ski erg. I used to love sprinting. I'm working on getting back there, or ropes. But I don't like the ropes as much because you can't track your progress, right? So it's kind of like, how fast are you going? Well, I don't know. Yeah. And then I try to always be active. I have a pull-up bar in my office, so I do that between patients. And that's pretty much it.
And it's very similar to kind of the way I train. I mean, I do a lot of the similar stuff, with that stuff, and I'm a big fan of the kettlebell, and obviously with the Concept 2 stuff, I do a lot of that stuff, and I think they make some great equipment. Let me talk, because you talked about eating. Even though you're a small tiny female, you're still putting away two pounds of ground beef a day. What else is in your diet?
So I use extra virgin olive oil. I'll use that. I'll make sure that I use a tablespoon on my meals, and I use a lot of potassium salt, which is called that new salt. I find that helps me keep my potassium levels up from when I test it in the blood. I'll do a little bit of avocado. I really don't. The truth of the matter is, and I probably haven't talked about this before in public, but I don't eat a lot of greens. I'll supplement in terms of fiber. I don't know. I know that the data says that you need it. I don't feel so great when I have a high fiber diet. So I don't eat a ton of vegetables. I'll use some green powder. I use First Form's green powder, and maybe I'll throw some fiber in there. But I feel great. And that's what works well for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's the end of the day, how you feel. I mean, I know there's people that will talk to us about, this is what the epidemiology suggests. And I would say it's only a suggestion, and don't take it as fact. We can't use population-based studies to tell you individually what to eat. And so, that's the thing I've found, particularly, with the fiber thing. There are people that, because your former colleague Lane and I got into a little discussion about fiber, and I said, look, I don't think it's essential. And, he said, well, it's obviously beneficial. And I said, well, I think it might be in certain situations. So it's kind of an interesting topic that more and more people are starting. The nice thing is more and more people are just questioning stuff. And I think that's one of the crazy things about having us all being interconnected. And, I'm talking to you from the other side of the country, and able to get together and collaborate and kind of get this stuff. A lot of interesting information is coming out there, and I talk about the fact that we have the opportunity to kind of crowdsource questions now, because in the old days it was just it was up to a single researcher to come up with an idea and test it and get it paid for and funded and peer reviewed, and it may never see the light of day. And now we can ask, you can say, hey guys, what do you think about this product? Why don't 10,000 of you test it and get back with us? And, we get an answer. And so I think that's kind of a cool concept that's coming.
And I think ultimately we all, as practitioners, all want the best for people. And I think that a lot of the general public feels maybe that there's feuds among us, but it's not. We really, at least from my perspective, I'm not going to bash a vegan. They all have something that works. And I think that when you're kind of within the science, it doesn't really become emotional. At least for me, it doesn't. And I think that we all really want to try to do the best for people. And I think that that's pretty important.
Yeah, and I would agree. We had a Dr. Joel Kahn, who's a vegan cardiologist, who I go back and forth with him kind of in a joking manner. I consider it just kind of collegial, poking fun. But certainly I get my share of you're a Nazi, you're an evil person, I hope you die stuff from kind of the idiots out there, and I kind of laugh at that stuff. And I fully support their right, anyone's right to make their own decisions and eat how they want. But the problem is, from my view, is that those things are not equally being shared, and we're being sort of asked to maybe all of us go plant-based. And I think that to me is a problem. And I'll continue to push back against that. And, it's good to see.
And being a geriatrician, being trained as a geriatrician, I saw the end of life. And I'll tell you who the sickest were. And those were the vegan and vegetarians. And I'm not, I was vegetarian for a long time. But unless you've been at the bedside of someone who's dying, and you've been with the families of individuals who are dying and at the end of their life, then the kind of conversation doesn't have the same weight. And I know you've been at the bedside of those individuals and actually seen it. I've seen it. So when you have people that are very opinion and not science-based, giving whatever their expert opinions who are not experts and really influencing the livelihood of individuals, that's when it becomes dangerous.
Yeah. And I think too, to kind of go back to what you were saying before about just the access to the doctors and professors out there who've kind of done the deep dives into some of these things. And things that I see more too is like, seems like people they're more willing to listen to their body and then ask questions or pry in a little bit from the professionals to find out, well, what is going on here? Why am I feeling like this when it's flying in the face of what this person's saying me? And it's like, we're kind of getting away from that time where it's like, well, here's what I'm going to do. Here's what everyone should do because, doctor's orders. And it's like, I mean, it's fine for us to, I think, tune into that stuff and look at what the consensus is amongst a lot of the medical professionals and things like that. And maybe that's a great starting point, but I think ultimately letting your body be the guide and then having someone who has those credentials willing to help you and say like, okay, if you're feeling good doing it this way, I don't see any reason not to. And having that open mind from that side of things too. Yeah,
I think that's very appropriate.
Hey, Gabrielle, let me ask, just because we want to be respectful of your time here. Where, if a patient was interested in, if somebody wanted to, have you as their physician, how would they go about doing that? And then talk to us about maybe where we can find you, normally. And then are you going to have some, I know you do some speaking as well. I can't remember if you're doing that.
I do a lot of speaking and educating.
Let's talk about your schedule on that.
So individuals can find me on the regular social media handles, right? So Instagram, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. That has a link tree with my website, which is drgabriellelyon.com. I have Facebook, Twitter. I am most active on Instagram. If an individual wants to come see me as a patient, then they can find that information on my website or message me or my team through Instagram. Or I have a practice on 5th Avenue and 61st called the Ash Center. They can find me there, and that's in Manhattan. If you would like a Skype consult, you can also message me again, but I won't be prescribing medications. I also see a lot of military operators, so if you guys are out there and listening, I want to support you. Definitely come see me, and there's other ways that I can help you. That's how they can find me. Oh, and speaking, I am part of Jason Redman. Do you know who Jason Redman is? Former Lieutenant Jason Redman.
I seem to remember the name, but I can't, not off the top of my head. So.
Yeah, he's an amazing individual. He was in Fallujah, Iraq. He got shot 7 times by enemy fire. Had his face completely blown off, 37 surgeries. You know him. He's an American hero. Anyway, I'm part of his Eagle Rise Speakers Bureau. So I'm happy to come to talk to individuals I speak for corporations, you name it. I'm happy to be there.
Awesome. I just wrote that stuff down so we can throw it in the show notes. So folks, if you want to go check out more from Dr. Lyon, those links will be there. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been awesome. I learned a lot. I think Shawn learned a lot. Hopefully maybe you learned one thing from the two of us combined. But yeah, it was great to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really enjoy this.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Human Performance Outliers Podcast with hosts Dr. Shawn Baker and Zach Bitter. If you enjoyed the show, please consider following us on social media and checking out our websites. Links to those can be found in the show notes. Also, if you have any questions or comments, please do not hesitate to shoot us an email at hpopodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again for tuning into the show.